Imagine walking into a room where ancient Hebrew texts are being chanted. Right. But it's not that silent, solemn reverence you'd expect in a classical cathedral.
Oh, definitely not a quiet, rigid vibe.
Exactly. It's set to the pounding, rhythmic heartbeat of like a psychedelic drum circle. People are sitting on the floor, their eyes are closed, they're swaying.
Right, and the traditional liturgy is totally stretched out.
Yeah. One single line of ancient poetry is just sung over and over, building in tempo, and it basically transforms into a breathwork exercise.
Which, if you just glanced at it, you might think you've stumbled into a 1960s hippie commune.
Totally. Or like, well, welcome to the deep dive. I am so incredibly thrilled you are joining us for this one, because today we are embarking on a truly unique mission.
We really are. We're unpacking a fascinating stack of personal notes and historical research you sent our way.
Right, all centered on this movement known as Jewish renewal. But what makes your stack of sources so compelling is that, these aren't just dry, dusty historical texts.
Not at all.
You've provided us with these deeply personal psychological notes that connect this entire religious movement to a specific personality profile.
A sub-personality in your own psychological framework.
Exactly, a persona you've named Addie.
And I have to say, reading through your notes on Addie was revelatory.
It was so cool.
You describe Addie as a persona characterized by a radically joyful spirituality. Someone who thrives in the wilderness, who finds profound meaning around a campfire.
Yeah, someone who really demands emotional openness.
Right, and who operates on a philosophy you beautifully termed dancing through grief.
I just love that phrase so much. So our goal today is to explore not just the historical mechanics of Jewish renewal, but to analyze why this specific ancient meets modern formula resonates so deeply with a psychological profile like Addie.
And really, with anyone who feels suffocated by rigid, walled-off institutions.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Jewish renewal is, it is so incredibly often misunderstood.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to misread.
Right. If you just glance at it from the outside, if you just see the acoustic guitars and the meditation cushions, it is entirely too easy to dismiss it as like New Age spirituality with a little Hebrew sprinkled on top.
Just a superficial aesthetic, yeah.
Exactly. But our mission today is to discover how this movement actually serves as a profound psychological and spiritual framework.
One that manages to blend the dense, esoteric mysticism of Kabbalah with modern, progressive activism.
And do it all without breaking the foundational code of the religion, which is wild to me.
It is wild. And to understand that synthesis, we really have to look at the friction that caused it.
The spark, right?
Yeah. This tradition asks a very difficult question. How does ancient mystical wisdom survive in a modern, often fractured, highly rational world?
And more importantly, how do you make that wisdom physically felt rather than just intellectually understood?
That's the million-dollar question.
So to understand how we get from the strict study halls of Eastern Europe to drum circles in the California redwoods, we need a chronological starting point. Let's look at the counterculture collision.
The 1960s.
Right. Picture the United States in the 1960s and early 1970s. You have a younger generation of Jewish Americans coming of age, and they are looking at traditional institutional Judaism, and they're feeling this massive, agonizing disconnect.
A total alienation.
Yeah. Your sources point out that to them, the institutions felt entirely too rigid, purely intellectual, and just overwhelmingly legalistic.
We have to place this in the immediate post-World War II context, though.
Okay, set the scene.
For a lot of the mid-20th century, the focus of institutional Judaism in America was, understandably, on sheer survival.
Right. Assimilation.
Assimilation. Building robust, respectable, suburban institutions. They were building massive synagogue centers.
Kind of like proving they belonged.
Exactly. The religious expression became highly rational, highly decorous. It was about fitting into the American religious landscape.
But by the time the 1960s roll around, that younger generation isn't looking for a respectable social club.
No, they're hungering for a direct, lived, emotional experience.
They felt the mysticism, the raw spiritual fire, had basically been stripped away and replaced with a spreadsheet of social obligations.
That's a great way to put it. They are looking for the soul, and they are being handed an architectural blueprint.
Yes. And right into this cultural collision steps a man who becomes the central figure of our deep dive, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi.
Such a fascinating figure.
I know you mentioned we shouldn't over-explain the basics, but the contrast here is just so stark.
It really is.
The best way I can think to describe his journey is imagine a classically trained symphony musician, someone who has played the violin in a prestigious, incredibly strict orchestra their entire life.
Okay, I follow you.
And they suddenly walk into a smoky underground club, discover jazz, and realize they can use their classical training to improvise.
Oh, the jazz analogy is incredibly apt.
Yeah.
Because Dr. Shalomi wasn't just casually affiliated with traditional Judaism.
Not at all. He was in deep.
He was deeply embedded in Shabbat Hasidism. He was ordained by the Lubavitcher Rebbe himself.
Right, which is intense.
Very.
Yeah.
This is a movement where every single moment of your day, how you tie your shoes, what you eat, how you pray, is governed by strict halakha Jewish law.
But the Rebbe gave him a very specific mission, didn't he?
He did. He said, go out to the college campuses and bring secular Jewish students back to the fold.
Which is where the friction sparks.
Mm.
He is sent out as an emissary to the 1960s counterculture, and instead of just pulling those kids back into the strict Orthodox fold, he actually genuinely listens to them.
He looked at what they were experiencing.
Yeah, he starts exploring Buddhism, he looks into yoga, he engages with psychedelics like LSD.
Which is just incredible to think about.
It is. He's trying to map those chemically induced altered states of consciousness onto the Kabbalistic maps of the divine realms he had studied his whole life.
He even meets with Catholic monks like Thomas Merton.
Right. He's taking the strict, ancient melodies he knows and suddenly realizing he can improvise with them.
And that improvisation, as you can imagine, caused a massive rupture.
Oh, I'm sure the establishment loved that.
Huh, hardly.
Yeah.
When you are part of a highly structured Orthodox community, you cannot simply start experimenting with Hindu mantras or dropping acid to see if it aligns with the Zohar.
Yeah, I'd imagine that's a huge red flag.
The tension became completely untenable, leading to his eventual split from Chabad. But he didn't leave Judaism.
That is a critical point right there.
He, along with other crucial figures, your notes highlight people like Rabbi Arthur Wasgau, Rabbi Tirza Firestone, and Rabbi Marcia Prager. They didn't abandon the ship.
They decided to redesign it.
Precisely.
And I want to look at exactly how they redesigned it, because this ties directly to your notes on Addie.
The persona connection.
Right. Addie represents a psyche that is adventurous, experience-driven, a personality that seeks the wilderness.
And in the 60s, a whole generation of Addies were leaving their childhood synagogues and flocking to Eastern ashrams, to meditation retreats, to nature communes.
Exactly. And Dr. Shalomi looked at this mass exodus and asked a brilliant, synthesizing question. He asked, could Judaism contain the exact same spiritual depth people are currently finding in Eastern religions?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer they arrived at was revolutionary, not because it was new, but because it was so old.
Wait, what do you mean?
Their answer was that the depth was already there. It had just been paved over by the desire to be rational and modern in mid-century America.
Oh, so they weren't inventing it from scratch.
Right. Their goal was to drill down through the concrete of institutionalism, tap into Judaism's deepest, most ecstatic spiritual roots, specifically from Hasidism and Lurianic Kabbalah, and bring that raw oil to the surface.
And this wasn't just a philosophical debate, right? It manifested in actual physical milestones.
It did. Between 1968 and 1973, we see the rise of the Havura movement.
Okay, and Havura basically means a fellowship or a group of friends, right?
Exactly. Instead of going to a massive sanctuary with a rabbi speaking down to them from a pulpit, these young people started forming small, experimental, egalitarian Jewish communities.
Meeting in living rooms, like DIY Judaism.
Totally DIY. You didn't need a building fund. You just needed a group of people willing to study, sing, and pray together.
And this energy eventually coalesces into the creation of Elish, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal.
But as with any systemic disruption, when you try to play jazz in a classical symphony hall, the establishment is going to call security.
Such a great way to phrase it.
The backlash against the Havura movement and early Jewish renewal was immediate, multifaceted, and deeply instructive.
Oh, the backlash was fascinating because everyone was angry, but for completely different reasons.
Oh yeah, they united the mainstream in opposition.
Right. The Orthodox establishment viewed renewal as straight-up heretical. They saw them altering liturgy, ignoring strict boundaries of Jewish law, and mixing in Eastern practices.
To them, it was extremely dangerous experimentation.
And then the conservative movement, which prided itself on historical continuity and rigorous academic scholarship, looked at renewal and felt it was completely anti-intellectual.
They thought it was just messy, informal emotionalism.
Yeah. And the Reform movement, they had spent the 19th and early 20th centuries stripping away the mysticism, the superstitions, and the esoteric rituals to present Judaism as a modern, rational, ethical religion.
So they looked at renewal, bringing back chanting, meditation, and Kabbalistic angels, and felt it was a massive regression.
Like going backwards in time. Basically, the overarching critique from the mainstream was, this is entirely too new age. You are taking 1960s hippie counterculture, throwing a prayer shawl over it, and pretending it's a legitimate religion.
Which is an understandable critique if you only look at the surface aesthetics. If you are used to a religion defined by strict obedience to a codified set of laws, seeing people meditate in the woods or chant a single Hebrew word for 20 minutes is jarring. It looks alien.
But to understand why the backlash was so strong and why the founders of Renewal pushed forward anyway despite being alienated by the mainstream, we have to look under the hood.
We have to look at the theology.
Exactly, the theological engine powering the movement. Because this wasn't just a change in aesthetics. They weren't just swapping out formal robes for tie-dye and sandals.
No, this was a fundamental seismic shift in how they viewed the architecture of the universe itself.
The theology is where we really start to see why this resonates with a psychological profile like Addie. We need to look at how Jewish renewal completely redefines the concept of God. Let's dive deep into that architecture.
It's a massive pivot.
It really is. In traditional institutional settings, God is very often framed in monarchical terms, a distant ruler.
A king on a throne.
Right, a king who hands down laws, judges your actions, demands obedience, and occasionally intervenes in history. But Renewal strips away that monarchical language almost entirely.
Instead, they use deeply mystical, Kabbalistic language.
They talk about God as the divine presence. They use the term Shekinah.
Yes, or they refer to God as the source of being or the grounds of all being.
Or they use the ultimate Kabbalistic term, Ein Sof, which translates to the infinite or that which is without end.
They essentially shift God from being a noun, a discrete entity sitting somewhere out in the cosmos, to a verb.
God is Godding.
Yes, God is the unfolding process of the universe itself. It is a living, breathing presence that permeates literally everything, from the stars to the dirt to the human nervous system.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this on behalf of you listening because this sounds beautiful, but practically speaking, it raises a massive issue.
Okay, let's hear it.
If God isn't a ruler handing down strict laws and instead is just this all-encompassing living presence or source of being, doesn't that risk making the religion completely toothless?
Ah, the vagueness argument.
Yeah, if God is just everything, how does that actually change the day-to-day life of a believer? Doesn't it just become a vague, feel-good platitude where nothing really matters?
That is exactly the critique the rationalist traditionalists made.
Yeah.
They argued that if you lose the strict lawgiver, you lose the moral guardrails.
Right.
But what's fascinating here is the Kabbalistic mechanics behind this worldview. For a renewal practitioner, recognizing God as an infinite presence doesn't lower the stakes of daily life. It raises them exponentially.
Really? How so?
Think about it structurally. If God is a distant king, you really only have to think about him when you're in the throne room, when you are in the synagogue, or when you are performing a specific ritual.
Okay, and the rest of the time, you go about your secular business.
Exactly. But if God is the source of being, if God is Ein Sosaf, then there is no such thing as secular business.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Every single interaction you have, how you treat a cashier, how you wash your dishes, how you walk through a forest, is an interaction with the divine. It shifts the primary focus of the religion from mechanical obedience to constant hypervigilant relationship and awareness.
Ah, I see. It's not about checking off a list of rules to avoid punishment from a judge. It's about waking up to the reality that you are constantly swimming in the divine, and therefore your actions carry cosmic weight.
Exactly.
But let me push that analogy further.
Go for it.
If God is everything, and God is in everything, then isn't God also in the pollution in the river? Isn't God in the cruelty of human beings? How do they reconcile a perfect, infinite presence with a broken world?
That brings us directly to Lurianic Kabbalah, the 16th century mystical framework that Jewish renewal relies on heavily.
Okay, break that down for us.
So Isaac Luria asked that exact same question. If God is Ein Sof, without end, and takes up all existence, how could there be room for a universe to exist at all?
Right, if a glass is totally full of water, you can't add anything else.
Perfect analogy. Luria posited the concept of tzimtzum, or divine contraction. God had to forcefully withdraw or contract to create a void, an empty space where the universe could exist.
So the creation of the universe starts with an act of divine exile, God making room.
Exactly. And into this void, God sent a ray of divine light contained in cosmic vessels.
Okay.
But the light was too intense, and the vessels shattered. This is the Shivarat HaKilim, the breaking of the vessels.
Oh, so the system broke on day one.
Yes. The divine light fell into the material world, trapped inside shards of broken vessels, which Kabbalah calls klipot, or shells.
So to answer my question about the pollution and the cruelty, the divine is in those things, but it is trapped inside thick, obscuring shells of materialism, ego, and brokenness.
Precisely. And this leads us to the absolute core purpose of human life in the renewal framework, the concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world.
I've heard that term used a lot in modern Judaism.
You have. In mainstream modern Judaism, tikkun olam often just means social justice or doing good deeds.
Like volunteering at a soup kitchen.
Right. But in the renewal and Kabbalistic context, it is a literal, mechanical, cosmic operation.
Oh, wow.
By acting with mindfulness, justice, and compassion, humans shatter those shells. We liberate the trapped sparks of divine light and elevate them back to the source.
That is unbelievably empowering.
Isn't it?
It completely rewrites the psychological script of religion. It's not, you are a miserable sinner who constantly falls short and needs to be saved. It's, you are a crucial, active partner in the physical and spiritual healing of the universe. Like, the cosmos actually needs you to do your job.
And if we look at your notes on Addie,
Yeah.
this is exactly why this theology fits that sub-personality so perfectly.
Oh, totally. Because Addie is an adventurous, active, experience-driven psyche.
Addie doesn't want to sit passively and be lectured to. Addie wants to be out in the wilderness engaging with the world.
The concept of tikkun olam as spark gathering turns the entire world into a spiritual wilderness for Addie to explore and heal. It's like a cosmic scavenger hunt.
It's a great way to look at it.
And what about the end game? The afterlife. A lot of religions use the afterlife as the ultimate motivator for behavior in the present. The sources mention that renewal texts do contain concepts like the soul returning to God, olam haba, which means the world to come, and even Gilgul.
Right, Gilgul, the Kabbalistic concept of reincarnation.
Yeah, how does that fit in?
Well, yes, those concepts are technically present, but we have to look at how they function. Take Gilgul, reincarnation.
Okay.
In some Eastern traditions, reincarnation is seen as a wheel of suffering you are trying to escape. In Kabbalah, a soul reincarnates not as a punishment, but as a highly targeted mission.
Wait, really? A mission?
Yes. You come back because there are specific sparks of divine light, perhaps tied to a specific geographic location or a specific relationship, that only your soul has the unique frequency to elevate.
Oh, that is so cool.
You are sent back to finish the job of tikkun olam.
That is fascinating. It makes reincarnation a heroic mission rather than a karmic prison sentence. But even with these concepts, the sources make it clear that renewal heavily shifts the focus away from the afterlife. This isn't a tradition where you endure suffering and deny yourself joy now to get a VIP ticket to heaven later.
No, the overwhelming focus is on living deeply and meaningfully right now.
Because the present moment is the only place where the divine sparks actually exist to be elevated.
Which is a profound psychological pivot. It demands extreme presence. And this brings us to a critical transition.
Let's hear it.
If your theology dictates that God is a living, dynamic presence meant to be directly experienced in the present moment, and that your job is to physically elevate divine sparks, your methods of worship have to radically change to accommodate this.
Right. You cannot just sit rigidly in a pew, silently reading a book, if your goal is an ecstatic, world-repairing encounter with the infinite.
You really can't.
Which brings us to Section 3, embodied spirituality. We need to talk about getting out of the head and back into the physical body.
The physical space is so important here.
Let's paint a picture of what this actually looks and feels like. Imagine walking into a Jewish renewal gathering. The physical architecture immediately tells you that the hierarchy has been dismantled. You are not in rows facing a stage. People are sitting in a circle.
The center of the room might just be a low table with candles or natural elements.
The circle is incredibly intentional, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It signifies that the divine presence isn't flowing from the front of the room down to the masses. The divine presence is being generated by the collective energy of the community sitting face to face.
And the sensory experience is entirely different. People are wearing the tallit, the traditional fringed prayer shawl, but they aren't just wearing it like a formal uniform.
No, they might pull it completely over their heads.
Right. creating a tiny, private meditation tent right there in the middle of the room. And the music, here's where it gets really interesting.
Music is key.
Because music in Jewish Renewal isn't just background noise, and it isn't a performance by a choir. It is a literal technology for altering consciousness.
They utilize nigunim, which are traditional Hasidic wordless melodies.
Wordless.
Yes. When you remove the words, you bypass the intellectual, analytical part of the brain. You stop analyzing the grammar of the prayer and start feeling the resonance of the sound.
Right. They might take a single phrase of Hebrew, maybe a line from the Psalms, and they won't just recite it once and move on. They will chant it.
With acoustic guitars, hand drums.
Yeah, and they will hold that chant for 10, 15, 20 minutes. It builds in intensity. There's call and response. Spontaneous ecstatic dancing breaks out in the circle.
They even use Kabbalistic visualization techniques, imagining the Hebrew letters of the divine name glowing in their minds as they sing.
It is highly emotional, highly joyful, and deeply communal.
The phrase embodied spirituality is paramount here.
Break that down for us.
Well, the Western world, particularly since the Enlightenment, has deeply separated the mind and the body. We treat the mind as the realm of intelligence, logic, and spirit, and we treat the body as a crude machine that just carries the brain around.
Right, the old brain in a vat concept.
Exactly. Renewal vehemently rejects that Cartesian dualism. The body is seen as an instrument of divine resonance.
Oh, wow.
When you chant, the physical vibration in your chest cavity, the regulation of your nervous system through shared breathing, that is not a precursor to a spiritual event. That is the spiritual event.
They are intentionally bringing the religion back into the nervous system. And if we look back at your notes on Addie, this is a perfect match.
It really is.
Addie loves campfires. Addie loves the physical wilderness. A campfire isn't just an abstract idea. You feel the heat on your skin, you smell the smoke, you hear the crackle. It's fully immersive.
Renewal services operate exactly like a spiritual campfire.
And to facilitate that kind of raw, vulnerable, emotional event, you need a completely different kind of leader, don't you?
You really do. You cannot have someone who acts like a CEO or a strict school principal lecturing from on high. The role of the religious leader fundamentally shifts.
In Renewal, they often use the term Reb, right?
Yes, it's a Hasidic-style honorific, like Rebbe, but it implies a deep, affectionate, almost intimate relationship with a spiritual teacher.
So a Reb in the Renewal context acts much more like a spiritual guide, a space holder or a midwife, rather than a strict legal authority whose job is to enforce dogma.
Exactly. Their job isn't to tell you what God thinks. Their job is to help you access your own direct physical experience of the divine.
It is a democratization of mysticism. Historically, Kabbalah was restricted.
Very restricted. You had to be a married man over the age of 40, deeply learned in the Talmud, just to open the books.
Wow. And Renewal says, no, the mystical experience is a human birthright. It doesn't belong hidden in an elite study hall. It belongs around the family dinner table, in the forest, in the body.
And this fluid, highly emotional approach bleeds right into family life and how they observe the calendar.
Right, because they still celebrate Shabbat, the Sabbath. They still observe Passover, Yom Kippur, all the traditional high holidays, but the flavor is entirely transformed.
For example, your sources note a massive foundational emphasis on ecology and nature. They don't just celebrate holidays indoors.
Which brings us to a crucial intersection. The focus on healing the self, on joyful worship and inner transformation. It doesn't stay trapped inside the chanting circle. It is not an escapist theology.
No, it is actively outward-facing.
The immense emotional energy they generate in these spaces is explicitly channeled directly outward into society, which moves us into Section 4, Tikkun Olam in action.
The social, political, and ecological impact.
Exactly. And I want to be very clear here for you listening. We are simply reporting on the factual beliefs and practices of the movement as outlined in your sources. We aren't endorsing any specific political framework, but we absolutely must understand how Renewal translates its mystical theology into concrete action.
Because for them, activism isn't a secular hobby. Activism is a form of deep religious devotion.
It is the mechanical application of gathering the sparks.
Exactly. If your theology dictates that the world is shattered and humans are divine partners mandated to repair it, then engaging with the suffering of the world is a strict religious duty.
The sources explicitly state that Jewish Renewal engages heavily with modern systemic issues: climate change, feminism, LGBTQ inclusion, and trauma healing. Let's break down exactly how they do that, starting with their ecological spirituality.
Okay, let's look at that.
We mentioned earlier that they view God as the unfolding process of the universe. Therefore, they do not view climate change merely as a political or economic issue. They view the Earth itself as a sacred, breathing creation.
Environmental stewardship is a strict halakhic duty for them.
Right. If the divine presence permeates everything, then an old-growth forest is just as holy, if not more so, than a synagogue sanctuary.
Clear-cutting that forest, or polluting a river, is not just bad environmental policy. It is a literal desecration of the divine body.
To put this into practice, they heavily lean into nature-based rituals. Let's look at the holiday of Tu B'Shvat.
Such a great example.
Historically, this was a very minor, almost administrative Jewish holiday, the New Year of the Trees, originally used just to calculate tithes for fruit crops in ancient Israel.
Right, very logistical.
The 16th century Kabbalists created a mystical Seder for it, but Renewal completely revived and expanded it. Today, a Renewal Tu B'Shvat Seder might be held outdoors in a forest.
They drink 4 cups of wine, shifting from white to red, representing the changing seasons and the flow of divine energy.
They eat specific fruits with hard shells and soft insides, symbolizing the breaking of the klipot, the ego shells, to reveal the divine spark.
They took an obscure mystical practice and transformed it into a massive, spiritually grounded Earth Day summit.
It's an indigenous mindset applied to modern environmentalism, utilizing an ancient Jewish mythological framework.
And then there's the profound structural theological shift regarding gender. The divine feminine.
Oh, this is a massive tectonic shift. Western monotheism has historically relied incredibly heavily on masculine pronouns and patriarchal imagery for God, Lord, King, Father, Master of the universe.
Jewish renewal pushes back against this forcefully, and they do it using Kabbalah.
They heavily emphasize the Shekinah, right?
Yes. In Kabbalistic tradition, the Shekinah is the feminine aspect of God, the immanent dwelling presence of the divine in the material world, which is currently in exile.
So in a renewal service, this isn't just an abstract concept. It changes the literal words coming out of their mouths.
Because Hebrew is a deeply gendered language.
Right. Every noun and verb is masculine or feminine. When renewal practitioners pray, they actively alter the ancient liturgy. Instead of the traditional masculine blessing formula, Baruch Atah Adonai, blessed are you, Lord, they might use feminine Hebrew language.
They might say Baruch Yah, or refer to God as Mekor HaChaim, the source of life.
They restore ancient feminine imagery, like referring to God as a nursing mother, or the womb of creation, which had been sidelined in traditional texts.
This perfectly aligned with the feminist theology emerging in the secular 1970s. But they weren't just importing secular feminism, they were unearthing marginalized, ancient mystical traditions to authorize the change.
They explicitly added the matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, into the central standing prayer, the Amidah, right alongside the patriarchs.
Which was fiercely controversial in the traditional world because you were fundamentally altering the fixed text of the prayer book.
It's an incredibly potent mix of the very old and the very new. And this willingness to experiment extends beyond the borders of Judaism itself. We have to talk about their high degree of interfaith curiosity.
They do not view other religions as enemies or as threats to be walled off.
Which makes perfect sense if you understand their core premise. If your ultimate goal is direct, embodied spiritual experience and the elevation of divine sparks, you're going to look for the most effective tools available to achieve that state, regardless of who invented them.
Exactly. The notes show that renewal respectfully borrows from outside traditions.
Right. They might incorporate vipassana meditation techniques from Buddhism. They might engage in Sufi dhikr, which is the Islamic practice of rhythmically chanting the names of God, and map it onto Jewish niggunim.
They look at the contemplative silence of Christian mysticism.
But the key word there is respectfully, and it's important to clarify the mechanics of this borrowing. They aren't trying to create a generic, blended, homogenized, one-world religion.
No, they remain fundamentally deeply Jewish. Their calendar is Jewish, their core narrative is the Exodus from Egypt, their language is Hebrew.
They view this interfaith borrowing through that same Kabbalistic lens. There are lost sparks of divine light scattered in all the world's wisdom traditions.
By learning a breathing technique from a Buddhist, a renewal practitioner believes they are gathering a Jewish spark that was exiled into the East.
Wait, I can hear the critics now. Isn't that just spiritual colonialism or cultural appropriation? You're just taking a Sufi dance and slapping a Hebrew word on it?
And that is exactly what some critics charge them with. But renewal practitioners defend it by pointing to a long history of Jewish adaptation. The Talmud itself absorbed Greek legal structures.
Oh, really?
Yes, medieval Jewish philosophy absorbed Islamic Aristotelianism. Renewal argues they are doing what Judaism has always done to survive, absorbing the best tools of the surrounding culture while maintaining the core Jewish operating system.
It's like a master chef who cooks deeply authentic, traditional Italian food, but borrows a specific Japanese knife technique because it simply makes the prep work more efficient and elegant.
Oh, I like that.
The resulting meal is still undeniably Italian, it's just better prepared.
That's an excellent way to conceptualize it. But this raises an important question. With all this immense boundary pushing, the interfaith exploration, the overt political activism, the reimagining of God in feminine terms, the psychedelic drum circles, the altering of ancient liturgy, how on earth does Jewish renewal fit into the broader Jewish family?
Right, where do they sit at the Thanksgiving table? Let's look at the ecosystem, what we can call the movement matrix, which brings us to Section 5. The post-denominational ecosystem.
To help us visualize exactly where renewal sits, your sources provided a really helpful tradition versus adaptation framework.
Imagine a graph. First, you have Orthodox Judaism. They are characterized by strong tradition and strict, unyielding adherence to halakha, Jewish law.
To them, the law is divinely given at Sinai and must be followed meticulously. You cannot just change the gender of a blessing because it feels right.
Right. From their perspective, renewal is heretical, way too experimental, and plays far too loose with the rules. Next, you have conservative Judaism. They try to strike a balance.
They believe Jewish law can evolve, but it must evolve slowly, through rigorous academic study, rabbinic consensus, and historical continuity.
So they look at renewal and say, you're focusing entirely too much on spontaneous emotional transformation and completely ignoring historical precedent and scholarship. You are throwing out the legal process for a drum circle.
Exactly. Then we have Reform Judaism. This movement is all about modern adaptation and progressive ethics.
They view the ancient law as moral guidance rather than strict binding obligation, and they are highly egalitarian. But traditionally, the Reform movement leans very rational, intellectual, and decorous.
There's a brilliant quote in the sources. Some people look at renewal and call it Reform Judaism with mysticism.
I love that. Renewal takes the progressive, egalitarian ethics of the Reform movement, but violently injects all the Kabbalah, the chanting, and the emotional ecstasy back into it.
And finally, you have Reconstructionist Judaism, which is fascinating to compare with renewal.
How so?
Well, both are highly progressive, both are egalitarian. But Reconstructionism is fundamentally a sociological and philosophical reinterpretation of Judaism. It is highly intellectual. It views Judaism as an evolving civilization.
Okay.
Renewal, on the other hand, is mystical, emotional, and intensely experiential.
So renewal is definitely the odd one out. It's the ecstatic, mystical revivalist hanging out in a room full of philosophers, legal scholars, and rationalists.
Which is exactly why renewal is often described not as a denomination, but as a post-denominational concept.
So what does post-denominational actually mean in practice? How does it mechanically work?
It means they realized that the era of building massive competing religious institutions was over. They aren't trying to build a giant renewal mega synagogue on every corner and pull you away from your current community.
It's no poaching member.
Right. The old divisions, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, were about drawing strict institutional boundaries. You belong to one and you don't belong to the others. Renewal operates entirely differently.
How so?
It operates more like a layer of software that can run on different hardware. It functions as a spiritual layer added to existing Jewish life.
So mechanically, you could be a dues-paying member of a standard Reform or conservative synagogue. You go there for the high holidays, your kids go to their Hebrew school, but then on a random weekend in July, you drive out to a Jewish renewal meditation retreat in the mountains to recharge your spiritual battery.
Exactly. It's fluid. It is not exclusive. It allows people to seek intense, embodied spiritual nourishment without forcing them to sever their institutional ties to their broader community.
And this software layer strategy has led to a fascinating paradox. The sources make a point to call them tiny but mighty.
Demographically, yes.
If you look at demographic studies, the actual strict population of people who check a box and identify exclusively as Jewish renewal is incredibly small. We are not talking about millions of people, yet their influence on the entirety of American Judaism is absolutely staggering.
Because they operate as a fluid post-denominational layer, their ideas have heavily infiltrated mainstream liberal synagogues.
It is the classic innovator's trajectory. Practices they pioneered in the 1970s when they were considered radical fringe outsiders. Things like incorporating acoustic instruments into prayer, teaching Jewish mindfulness meditation, using feminist liturgy, prioritizing environmental ethics in religious spaces. You can now find these embedded in mainstream conventional synagogues across the country.
The mainstream rejected them initially and then quietly absorbed their best innovations.
They were the spiritual R&D department for the rest of the religion. They took all the risks, did all the wild experiments, and the mainstream adopted what worked.
It's a great legacy.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground. We've looked at the history and the 1960s collision. We've mapped out the Lurianic theology of the infinite divine presence and the shattered vessels.
The embodied rituals, the ecological activism.
Right, and where they sit in the wider post-denominational ecosystem. But now, we must fulfill the core mission of this deep dive. We have to connect this vast, ancient, yet modern tradition back to the highly specific personal notes you shared regarding your Addy persona. Which brings us to Section 6, the psychology of joy and grief.
This is where the synthesis happens. This is where the abstract theology of Kabbalah meets the lived psychology of the individual.
So directly to you listening right now, why does this hybrid movement appeal so strongly to a personality profile like Addy? Let's bring up the personal reflections you provided in the source material.
You described Addy as an adventurous, experience-driven psyche, a personality that craves the physical wilderness, that feels stifled by walls, and that engages deeply in a process you called dancing through grief.
That phrase, dancing through grief, is the absolute linchpin of this entire deep dive. It perfectly encapsulates the deepest psychological worldview of the Jewish Renewal movement, and specifically its Hasidic roots.
Unpack that for us. How does a religion functionally dance through grief?
In the Renewal framework, derived directly from the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, joy and pain are not mutually exclusive states.
They aren't binary opposites.
Right. It's not like one must completely end for the other to begin. Renewal philosophy explicitly teaches that immense joy and profound brokenness coexist simultaneously in the human heart.
There's a famous Hasidic saying, "There is nothing so whole as a broken heart."
Yes. Life is profoundly complex, the world is shattered, remember the breaking of the vessels, and there is immense, undeniable suffering. But the spiritual response to that suffering is not stoic silence.
It is not denying the pain, and it is not succumbing to nihilism.
The response is to sing, to physically move, to feel the emotional depth of the human experience so fully and authentically that the grief itself is transformed into a vehicle for a spiritual encounter.
Oh, wow. So when Addy is dancing through grief around a campfire, that is quite literally an embodied spiritual practice in the Renewal tradition.
Exactly.
It is acknowledging the brokenness of the world, the tikkun olam aspect, the shattered shells, but reacting to it with a joyful, resilient, defiant physical energy.
Joy, or samsha in Hebrew, is not just a happy mood in this tradition. It is a spiritual weapon against despair. Addy's optimism and warmth match a tradition that celebrates spiritual connection through raw feeling and community energy, rather than through rigid emotional control or intellectual detachment.
If you are an experience-driven psyche like Addy, you do not want to sit in a library and read a theological textbook about the properties of fire.
No way. You want to sit around the campfire, smell the smoke, feel the heat on your face, and sing into the dark. Renewal provides the theological campfire for that exact psychological need.
That makes perfect sense. Now, when we look at the virtues valued by the movement and the psychological traits of its followers, it's a perfect mirror for Addy.
What are those main virtues?
The main problems humans face, according to Renewal, aren't breaking archaic dietary laws or reciting the wrong words in a prayer. The real sins, so to speak, the things that actually damage the cosmos, are spiritual disconnection, an inflated ego, apathy, and emotional numbness.
And the virtues they prize above all else: deep compassion, humility, intense mindfulness, and ecstatic joy.
Which is exactly why it attracts spiritual seekers. It attracts the artists, the creatives, the activists, the outcasts. It attracts people who crave emotional authenticity over strict dogma.
If you are someone who embraces life's fleeting moments and finds meaning through messy lived experience, which your notes explicitly say Addy does, you are going to chafe against a religious institution that tells you to sit perfectly still, face forward, and be quiet.
You are going to thrive in a tradition that tells you to grab a drum, move your body, and express the infinite divine presence through the rhythm of your own heartbeat.
It's a beautiful, elegant alignment. But there's another level to this, isn't there? A profound structural connection between the psychology of your notes and the theology we've discussed.
Yes, and I think this is the most profound insight we can draw from your provided material. We're looking at a multi-layered mental model.
Tell me more about that.
In your psychological framework, you're exploring this concept of subpersonalities. The idea that your psyche isn't just one flat monolithic thing, but a dynamic collection of different parts, like Addie, that engage with meaning, memory, trauma, and experience in vastly different ways.
Right, you need a holistic framework to integrate all those fractured parts into a healthy whole.
Exactly. What is absolutely fascinating here is that Jewish renewal is attempting the exact same integration process, just on a macro cosmic religious scale.
Okay, wait, explain that connection. That is huge.
Most religious movements specialize in one single area of the human experience. They're highly intellectual, focusing on study and law, or they're purely social, focusing on community potlucks, or they're strictly mystical retreats, disconnected entirely from the real world.
They segment the human experience.
But Jewish renewal explicitly tries to integrate psychology, physical spirituality, community worship, and radical political activism into one holistic breathing organism. They are trying to integrate the sharp intellect of the Talmud, the emotional ecstasy of the Hasidic chant, the physical reality of the Earth's ecology, and the social justice required for human dignity.
Wow.
Just as you're working to integrate different psychological subpersonalities to find a holistic, healed self, renewal is integrating different, often conflicting human drives to find a holistic, healed, divine experience, gathering the psychological sparks and gathering the cosmic sparks.
Wow. It's integration on the micro level of the individual psyche, perfectly mirrored by integration on the macro level of a spiritual community. That is brilliant.
It is a tradition that recognizes that we are impossibly complex, multi-layered beings living in a fractured world, and therefore we require a multi-layered, dynamic, fiercely joyful spirituality to match.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's try to summarize the core takeaway from this incredibly deep dive.
Let's do it.
At its heart, Jewish renewal is the synthesis of ancient Jewish mysticism and the modern hunger for authentic experience. It was born in the friction of the 1960s counterculture, driven by brilliant pioneers who realized they didn't have to abandon their ancient heritage to find deep, experiential, embodied spirituality. They just had to dig deeper into it.
By bringing God out of the distant monarchical heavens and recognizing the infinite divine in the present physical moment, they reawakened joyful worship, ecstatic chanting, and profound emotional vulnerability.
They created a path that values inner psychological transformation, ecological stewardship, and social justice over mere mechanical obligation to the rules.
And in doing so, they provided a durable, vibrant spiritual home for the addies of the world, the artists, the seekers, the wilderness wanderers, and the experience-driven personalities who refuse to be walled in.
But before we let you go, our expert has a final thought for you to mull over, something that builds on everything we've discussed today but looks to the future.
We talked heavily about the core renewal idea that Judaism, and really any tradition, must be an evolving organism in order to survive. Think about the trajectory of our modern world right now.
It's intense.
It is increasingly digital, it is highly disembodied, our lives are lived through flat screens, we are intellectually overwhelmed by endless streams of data, and we are increasingly isolated. We are flooding with information, but absolutely starved for physical, spiritual connections.
So true.
Perhaps the survival of all ancient traditions, not just Judaism, but any philosophical or spiritual framework, relies on this exact renewal formula. If a spiritual tradition cannot adapt to the desperate, modern psychological need for embodied, physical, and communal joy, if it cannot get us out of our heads and back into our nervous systems, it risks becoming a pristine intellectual museum piece rather than a living, breathing guide for human life.
A cathedral without walls, right. The structure might change, the stone might weather away, but the fire inside the circle is what actually keeps us warm. Thank you so much for sharing these incredible, deeply personal notes with us and for trusting us to take this custom deep dive with you. Keep gathering those sparks, keep dancing through the grief, and we'll catch you on the next one.